Just ahead, there's another edition of the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks and in the Orlando area on Tough TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I'm Al Spry, raconteur and man about town. We're talking with Anne McMonagle of the Make-A-Wish Foundation. She's going to tell you what Make-A-Wish is and a whole lot more.
We think you'll find the conversation in the hour ahead to be enjoyable, perhaps even a little bit enlightening, if I dare say so myself. So we'll invite you to pull up a chair and put an ear on the radio. The Florida Roundtable begins following these messages. We are back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks, and in the Orlando area of Tough TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And Al, as promised, we are joined in the studio with us today is the charming Director of Development for the Central and Northern Florida Make-A-Wish Foundation, Anne McMonagle. Anne, nice to have you with us today.
Hi, yes, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
To get us started, kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be involved with Make-A-Wish, and then we'll get into what that is and everything.
Yeah, so I've lived in Florida most of my life. I went to, when I was in high school, you have to get those volunteer hours, and so I was looking at the list of options, and Make-A-Wish was on there, and so it just struck me as soon as I saw Make-A-Wish Foundation, and I learned a little bit more about what the organization does. And then when I turned 21, that's the age that you can be a wish granter, where you actually are a volunteer and go out and grant the children's wishes. So I got involved as a wish granter, as a volunteer first. And then after I went to UCF, after I graduated college, I did a couple different sales types of positions and really wasn't the direction I wanted to be in. And so I went to see if there were any positions available at Make-A-Wish, and there were, and so that's how I ended up here. And I've been working for the organization now for going on 7 years, and I absolutely love it. And we, as an organization, kind of our mission, if I can go into a little bit of that, we grant the wishes of children between the ages of 2.5 and 18 years old who have been diagnosed with a life-threatening medical condition.
Mm-hmm. Now, this condition doesn't necessarily have to result in the child's life ending, right? But it's the serious conditions, in other words, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the common misconceptions about Make-A-Wish is that it's for terminally ill children, that it's their last dying wish, and that's not actually the case. Again, like we call it life-threatening condition. So that's anything that's degenerative, regressive, and life-threatening. So about 80% of our children actually go on to lead healthy lives. Unfortunately, of course, we do have children that pass away. We always take comfort in the fact that they received their wish before, and their family have memories to look back upon.
Well, Reagan and I are actually big children, and I had the flu about a month ago. Does this? Can we kind of sneak in? Is there some type of a gray area that we can exploit? What types of wishes do you get from the kids? What do they ask for?
Yeah, well, what's awesome about our organization is that it's whatever the child's most heartfelt wish is. And we, our volunteers are trained to really determine what the child's wish is, not the parent's wish. It has to be the child's wish. And so it's with whatever is within the child's imagination. So typically they fall into 4 different categories. I wish to be, which could be, I wish to be a firefighter. I wish to be, we actually had one in our chapter here in Central Northern Florida a couple of years ago. He wished to be a Navy SEAL for the day. And so we flew him up to Virginia to the base there, and he was a Navy SEAL for the day. He was able to go into their obstacles, and he got a uniform. They named him an honorary Navy SEAL. He received a folded flag. So that's an example of I wish to be wish. We have I wish to have, which is something like I wish to have a shopping spree, or I wish to have a room makeover. I wish to meet, which is I wish to meet a celebrity or an athlete, or anybody famous, I guess. And then I wish to go, and that's something where a child may wish to go to see snow, may wish to go to New York. Anything really. Being in Florida, we get a lot of the children's wishes from out of state that wish to go to any of the theme parks. So we're one of the top destination chapters. But it's whatever the child's most heartfelt wishes.
Now, how does the child or parents, how do they go about getting involved with you?
Yeah, well, we are a child or can be referred to us in three different ways. They can either fill out the referral form, the parent can, or the doctor or medical professional can. Once they're referred to our organization, again, to be eligible, they have to be between the ages of 2.5 and 18. Diagnosed with a life-threatening condition, and they can't have received a wish from another wish-granting organization or from us before. And once we receive their paperwork, we determine their eligibility. After we've corresponded with a doctor to make sure they meet our eligibility standards, we assign 2 wish-granter volunteers to go to the family's house. One meets with the child, one meets with the parents, and that's specifically designed so that we do get the child's wish. You'd be surprised how sometimes the parents try to infiltrate their ideas in it. But that's why
that doesn't surprise me.
But that's why
ask for a new car, Bobby.
Yeah, or ask for a trip. And what they really want to do is to be something. So, so we work really hard to make sure it's the child's most heartfelt wish. And then after the wish is determined, the wish granters, who again are the volunteers, they work with our office staff to make the wish happen, make it magical.
So what is the history of the organization, and how long has this been happening? And go into that a little bit.
Yeah, well, we first started in 1980. There was a little boy named Christopher Gracious, and he was battling leukemia. He wished to be a police officer, and the neighborhood got together and they decided to grant his wish. And so he was the first honorary police officer. This happened in Phoenix, Arizona. He was given a police uniform, and he was, got to go in a helicopter and go in the police patrol car. And shortly after that, he actually unfortunately passed away, but his legacy lives on because Chris started our foundation. And so the volunteers that were involved in granting his wish, they began Make-A-Wish Foundation. So we started on a national level in 1980. Since then, we've grown to 64 chapters within the United States. We have 27 international affiliates. And as a national organization, we've granted over 200,000 wishes. Locally, in Florida, there are 2 chapters. There's Central and Northern Florida, which covers Sarasota all the way up to the Panhandle, and then the Southern Florida chapter, which is Sarasota down. So for Central and Northern Florida, we began in 1994. Our first wish was to meet Dolly Parton. And since our inception, we've granted almost 5,000 wishes. We'll be celebrating our 5,000th wish at the end of this year.
That's a lot of wishes. Wow. Do you put a limit on the wishes? I mean, how many kids come in a year? Do you have a certain amount, or is it when a kid gets a wish, do you make it happen, or do you ever get overwhelmed or anything? How does that work? How do you pace yourself with? Must be a lot of wishes out there.
Yeah, we do get quite a few referral forms every year, but we don't turn away a child. So, we rely on, part of it is funding. So we rely on the support of the community to be able to give us funding so that we can make the wishes happen. In our area, we have the numbers of wishes that we could grant the potential is about 700. Right now, our goal is to grant 300 wishes this year. And, if we had the funding, we could do more medical outreach to reach more children. So this year, in 2015, we will grant 300 wishes, and that's in the Central and Northern Florida region.
Now, for those people listening along the network line, businesses that say, well, that sounds interesting. If they make a donation to help you fund these things, what are we talking about here? I mean, why should they do it? Do we get tax deductions, or how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. Depending on what the donation is towards, whether it's, a special event as a sponsorship or if it's just a pure donation, they are tax deductible. But really, it's, throughout our organization, there are many opportunities to get involved, whether it's a special event that's going on in the area that a business wants to be a sponsor and have their logo on some of the materials. Make-A-Wish has a very strong brand recognition. So we're a great brand to get involved with. But it's also the idea of being able to grant a child's wish. And why does that matter? What does that mean? Well, when a child is diagnosed with a life-threatening condition, everything changes. They one day go from taking their child to baseball practice or dance practice, and the next day they go to the doctor's office and discover that they have to go right to the emergency room for surgery, or they have to go right through treatments. Everything changes. And so it's during this time of chaos and of uncertainty that Make-A-Wish steps in to really give the family and the child hope and strength and joy to keep on fighting, to keep on going. And so that's why it's really important for individuals and companies to really support our mission and to support the local community.
Now, we should do this a couple of times, now and again before we part company. How, a website, phone numbers, how do they contact you?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you two websites. There's Central and Northern Florida chapter website, and you can go on there to get all kinds of information, is cnfl.wish.org. That's again, cnfl.wish.org. And then the Southern Florida chapter, if you live in South Florida in the Miami area, it's snfl.wish.org. So you can go to those websites to find more information on how you can get involved, local events in the area, or even if you're interested in volunteer opportunities, they're all on the website.
What's your favorite wish that was granted during your tenure there to a child?
Yeah, we actually, I'll give you a recent example. There's so many favorites of mine. I could probably talk for a long time about it. But this past summer, we granted a wish of 8-year-old Gabriel. He wished to be a park ranger at Yosemite National Park. And so we flew him out to California, and he was a park ranger for the day. They set up different scenarios for him where he got to put out a fire and he got to rescue someone off the mountain.
Wow.
And they gave him a park ranger uniform with the little park ranger hat.
That's great.
And he was a park ranger for the day.
That's great. That's a lot of fun. He must like Yogi Berra and stuff. Because
Yeah.
why else would you come up with park ranger, for goodness sakes?
Yeah.
But, tell us about some of the events. I know that we're heard all over Florida, obviously, but tell us about some events that are going on in your chapter.
Yeah, so our spring is a really busy time for us. We have Walk for Wishes, which is 2 laps around Lake Eola. We're talking here in Orlando. But in a lot of different regions, there is a Walk for Wishes going on. In Tampa, there's a Walk for Wishes in the Southern Florida chapter too. We also have Wishmakers Ball, which is our signature gala. It's our largest black tie event of the year. And then that takes place at the Waldorf Astoria here in Orlando. There's one in Tampa as well. And then we also have a golf tournament in most of our areas too. So the best way to get more information, again, is to go to the website to find out more details about what's going on in your area.
How long does it take, on average? I know there's no specific answer here, but from the point where a parent brings a child and they contact you, or they're on the website and they make the contact, on average, how long does it take to make a decision and get a wish for a child?
Yeah, on average, it's about 3 to 6 months, depending on the situation, depending on the child. Again, the children that we serve are sick, so a lot of times there is rescheduling. They may have to go back into the hospital, but on average, 3 to 6 months.
And that involves, as we kind of said before, mom and dad say, "Oh, Bobby needs a new car." You've got to push all of that aside. Mm-hmm. We don't like to think about those things, but that's out there. And I guess that's where I'm going with this. The screening process for those people who might be considering making a sizable donation to you. There's a lot of work that goes into making sure that the wishes are legitimate and what the child really wants.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why our volunteers that go into the child's and the family's house are trained, and we do role plays with them, and they're trained to discover what the child's actual heartfelt wish is.
Well, thank you, Ann McMonagle. Why don't you give out that information one more time on how people can reach you and so forth?
Yeah, so the website is cnfl.wish.org. Again, it's cnfl.wish.org.
All right. Well, Ann McMonagle, the Director of Development, the Make-A-Wish Foundation in Central and Northern Florida, thank you so much for being with us this day. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
And we'll continue our conversation in a moment. This is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. And in the Orlando area, we're seen, of course, on TV 38, Tough TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
I'm political commentator Al Spry. It's great to be here with you, Reagan, and with all of our fine folks who listen to Florida Roundtable every week. We welcome you and we thank you. Also, for those who watch us on Tough TV 38 in Orlando, thank you. We are on 3 days a week on TV.
Wow.
Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays at 9 a.m. So check us out over the air at Tough TV Channel 38.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
So let's start off with the winners and losers of the week in Florida politics. We'll kick it off with that.
All right.
The loser is Jeb Bush. Now, why?
All right.
Bloomberg Business Week delved into Bush's sideline as a budding private equity mogul. Cayman Islands, anybody? Depicting him as another budding Mitt Romney. The piece raised tough questions about Bush's vulnerabilities, I should say, as a candidate, as well as his readiness to run.
Okay, well, he has now he's made 2 appearances in the last couple of months in South Carolina. This past week, he delivered a commencement address at the University of South Carolina. And you say, well, why South Carolina? Well, because South Carolina has the first presidential primary in the South when we get to 2016.
Well, I got to tell you, Reagan, you know how I feel about Clintons and Bushes and Kennedys and all these families that seem to have a divine right to lead.
Yeah.
This is America, and we're not supposed to be that. We're not supposed to have these dynastic families.
Well, once or twice a century, unfortunately, I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, in the case of John Quincy Adams, it was probably fortunate, but that's a long time ago.
All right, so we did that, and we did Bush and Jr., but now do we have to have another Bush?
Well, all I was going to say is that, about once or twice a century, we get into these families, the Roosevelts, the Kennedys, the Bushes, the Adams, Harrison. It doesn't happen very often. But Americans do seem to have a penchant for it if they behave themselves.
Okay, so here's the rule. No more than 2. Two is the max.
That's a good rule.
No more.
That's a good rule.
Like Roosevelt was 2, the
Harrisons
was 2, Adams was 2. Yeah. That's fine. 2 is fine. 2 Bushes is enough.
Yeah.
Right after Jeb finished speaking to graduates at the University of South Carolina this past week, a Democratic opposition research group tweeted it was there watching. The quote is, "Nice but typical commencement speech you gave. Hope you're well. All the best," wrote the president of the group American Bridge. Bush naturally steered clear of any 2016 presidential talk, but the growing prospect of him running attracted a lot of outside eyes on what indeed is a nice conventional speech. His advice to graduates? Seek what he is searching for, and from his impending decision, joy. He says, 3 pillars of advice. Don't let anyone tell you how big to dream. This is good advice. Don't be afraid to experiment and change, and even fail, no matter how many challenges, and remember to have fun. Okay, this is actually very good advice. So kudos to Jeb on giving good advice.
All right.
Now stay out of the race. McCullum on what went right for the GOP. Let's talk a little bit about Bill. We haven't had him on the show he hasn't been around in a while.
Well, I believe he's practicing law in Washington, D.C. these days. So.
He was featured in the Wall Street Journal's The Weekend Interview column on Saturday. He's the chairman of the Republican State Leadership Committee. As the WSJ points out, Republicans had a big year. McCullum explains how they did it. Later, he's prompted by the writer on who he favors for president. The media focuses on national elections, but the bigger story of 2014 may be the earthquake in the states. Republicans now hold 31 governorships, but as important and less well understood, they also hold more state legislative seats than at any time since 1928, Reagan. Did you know that?
That's incredible. No, I knew it was high, but I didn't know it was that high.
These are the building blocks of national success because they train future House and Senate candidates and become laboratories for conservative reform.
Well, that's where your bench is. You develop your players.
So who he favors for president, he's not saying right now. But it's nice to see him kicking around there a little bit.
Yeah, we'll get him back in here one of these days soon. Let us take a pause along the network line here. We'll remind you that you are listening to the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks and of Tough TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
And we'll continue our conversation following these messages. From Pensacola to Key West and all points in between, you're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks and in the Orlando area on Tough TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And time for us to do something here we haven't done for a while, Al, and that is you and I get to have a little bit of an extended conversation here. Obviously, lots of things going on in this world for us to look at today.
Yeah, the latest is, of course, there's a big report on the CIA interrogation of terrorists, militants, Al-Qaeda people. So here's the take. And, I've thought about this one for a while, Reagan, because, 9/11 happened. Obviously, there was a need to get information to prevent anything else from happening, also to find out the people who did it. And I understand that. But that needs to be balanced, I believe, with the feeling that America doesn't torture and shouldn't torture, that we are a nation above such brutal tactics. When I was growing up and when you were growing up, Reagan, torture was a tactic that we said was used by the villains. These are the bad guys use torture, right?
This was the Bataan Death March, some of the atrocities that were perpetrated by the Japanese enemies in World War II, the Germans in those times, and it was revolting to everybody here, without a doubt.
And now after 9/11, I think some of the opinions held by quite a few people have changed in saying, well, we got to get them, so everything's off the table. Yeah, but when you go and you become and do things that your enemy does, then how does that differentiate you eventually from who your enemy is? That's the moral question.
There you are.
Is it just labeling it with a USA stamp and then it's okay? Well, according to guys like John McCain, who was tortured in Vietnam, no, torture's wrong.
Yeah.
And so this is not an opinion that's just held by, say, liberal or left people. You can't label it, really.
No.
America is the shining city on a hill, as Reagan said.
Yes.
Not you, Reagan, but Ronald Reagan.
President Reagan. Yeah.
So if it's the shining city on a hill, and if we want to ascribe to being the good guys who wear white, well, why are we torturing people? And so and the reason why I'm bringing this up is Dick Cheney was on Meet the Press last week. And he was quizzed by Chuck Todd about this report. Basically, Cheney called it a bunch of crap, I think was the quote for the report. Because Cheney, I guess his reputation is on the line. Now, you interviewed him. Tell us a little bit about that, Reagan, when that happened and what went down.
Well, it's been a long time ago, Al, but it was 2004 when he was the sitting vice president. And it happened here in Orlando. He had come to address the James Madison Institute was having a convention here. And I was the only reporter in Central Florida invited to sit down and have a one-on-one with him. To this day, I don't know how that happened. But
well, of course you know, because you're an excellent journalist, Reagan.
Well, thank you, sir. He was gracious. We sat down and did a half an hour face-to-face. I felt like he answered the questions that I asked him directly. Of course, we were the Middle East, the Iraq business was ongoing, and there was an awful lot of controversy going on at that time. There was no discussion. I don't think any of us knew what the CIA was doing at that time.
Because they did it in black. They were black ops. They did it in black black sites, they call it, which is not in the United States. They took these people to undisclosed locations in neighboring countries like Qatar and other places like that in the Middle East with friendly governments, and they basically interrogated them using quote unquote enhanced interrogation techniques. Well,
things like waterboarding.
I call that torture.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not cutting someone's limb off or putting them on the rack, but it is a form, Reagan.
Yeah.
And, there's been a lot of studies done about torture and how effective it is. And the studies over and over come up with the fact that when people are being tortured and given these pain-inducing treatments and so forth, they'll say anything, whether it's true or not. The preferred interrogation methods over the years, which the CIA is very adept in, is befriending the person that you're interrogating, making them trust you, and then they're more likely to open up. But you don't need the brutality. You don't need a Bataan Death March American style.
Exactly.
So, when Chuck Todd is interviewing Dick Cheney here, he tries to defend it, not by specifically defending the methods, but saying, this is the quote, "In my mind, I've told you what meets the definition of torture. It's what 19 guys armed with airline tickets and box cutters did to 3,000 Americans on 9/11. I mean, what was done here apparently certainly was not one of the techniques that was approved. I believe was done for medical reasons. So basically, he's just deflecting by saying, well, we were attacked, so it's all fine. But the biggest quote during this interview was about the end justifying the means. When you say the end justifies the means, well, that opens you up to all kinds of stuff, right? And then anything goes, pretty much. So that's the problem here. When you open yourself up to this moral, shall we say, ambiguity, then where does it end? Who do you stop torturing? Can you torture Americans eventually?
Well,
once you open the door to that, where does it stop?
The horse comes out of the barn, and you got a problem. And I think that honestly, we can look at this, and over the years, and probably many people subconsciously, you get this notion. Well, they did it to us, and it ought to be all right for us to do it to them. But when you do that, you have brought yourself to the same level of the people that are the enemy. And we've always managed to hold ourselves above that. And, in a fit of anger, a pick of anger, it happens. And I understand that. But I think, as you're saying, you have to look at that bigger and broader picture of where we're going and who we are.
And also, I think as time goes on, from the attack through Iraq and Afghanistan, people are starting to see now a different Dick Cheney. I used to think Dick Cheney was all right when I first knew him and knew about him, even going back years before 9/11. I thought he was a sharp guy. In fact, when he ran with Bush, everyone was hailing how he would give the president gravitas. Do you remember the gravitas thing?
And that was, the speculation was that Bush 41 installed Dick Cheney as vice president with 43, and that's the word you use to give gravitas. You go back across the years. I mean, he served with Richard Nixon. He was the defense secretary for Bush 41. He had many important government offices before he was the vice president.
Yes,
and that gravitas, that's a good word for him.
But sometimes gravitas may not be a good thing. Because then what that means is you have certain ways of doing things. You're very sharp, but maybe the things you're doing aren't in the best interests of the United States, perhaps. Now, there's one thing that always stuck out to me I'm going to briefly talk about. When 9/11 happened, they had the hearings.
Yeah.
Norman Mineta, FAA Secretary of Transportation, did a testimony. There was a stand-down order by Cheney. And I don't know if many people remember this, but you guys can look it up. I'll let you do the research. As the plane approached the Pentagon, the quote is, when I got to the White House, it was being evacuated. I met briefly with Richard Clark, a National Security Council staff member, who had no new information. Then the Secret Service escorted me down to the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, otherwise known as the PEOC. I was made aware of it during the time that the airplane coming into the Pentagon. There was a young man who come in and said to the vice president, the plane is 50 miles out. The plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the vice president, do the orders still stand, the non-shoot down orders?
Yeah.
And then the vice president turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? Mm-hmm. That was, of course, buried. That story, but so you have to do a little research, but that is true testimony. Yeah. So what does that tell you, Reagan?
It's a thought that I don't like to have, Al, to tell you the truth, but as you say, it's documented.
And so, I just don't trust Dick Cheney. And so when Dick Cheney says we didn't torture, that tells me we did torture. I think he's lost the trust of a lot of folks, and even in the media are starting to go, hey, what the heck has Dick Cheney been smoking lately?
Well, and I have said this before, and perhaps the rule needs to be extended here. There was a time frame when Jimmy Carter ran his mouth and said an awful lot of things that were horrid for a former presidents don't behave like that.
Yes.
And so maybe we need to extend that rule to former vice presidents as well.
I think so. I think you're right, and I think people need to look at every angle. Not just go from an emotional standpoint, but look at it from a rational standpoint.
Yeah. Well said, sir. On that note, let us take another pause along the network line here. We'll remind you that you are listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks. And in the Orlando area, of course, we're seen 3 times a week on Tough TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
And we'll invite you to stay put. Al and I have got a whole kind of list here of things that we want to talk about, and we'll do so in a moment. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks, and in the Orlando area of Tough TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
And we do thank you for the pleasure of your company. We know you've got a lot of choices out there, up and down the dial and all around. So we're always very pleased when you choose to spend a few minutes here with us.
Yeah, but Reagan, let's be honest. There's no good at choices. Florida Roundtable.
That's true.
Really? Come on. Where else are you going to hear this kind of talk?
A brief aside, not to kind of pat us on the back, but I went to the candlelight processional out at Disney. And I arrived in the afternoon, and I went by the kiosk there to pick up the credentials for the special seating for that program, And the young man who was there took my papers, the invitation, and he looked at it, and he got my badges, and he pointed at me, and he said, "Florida Roundtable, you're the guy." And my head got and I swelled. So we got him along the network line, Al, and it's always nice when something like that happens.
It is nice. Yeah. It is nice. I have that happen to me ever so often as well, and I don't know if they're kidding me or not, but I guess it does.
When they can come back and tell us what we were talking about, they actually heard it, So, anyways, all right.
Bill Clinton chimed in on the Eric Garner story. Of course, this is a black gentleman who, up in New York City, was selling individual cigarettes without paying taxes on them.
Yeah.
And which, of course, is illegal. They had a confrontation with police. This was in Staten Island. The police were undercover, I believe, and one put him in a chokehold, brought him down to the ground. Of course, chokeholds are not supposed to be used anymore.
Right.
They've been banned for years by police. Well, Mr. Garner died, and the officer involved was not indicted, sparking days of protests around New York City and elsewhere in the country. So Clinton's quote is, "Garner was obviously not well. He was overweight and vulnerable, therefore had lung problems, heart and lung problems. He was doing something he should not have been doing. That was illegal. He was selling untaxed cigarettes on the street in small volumes, trying to make a little extra money. But he didn't deserve to die because of that."
Yeah.
This family man, he was a family man,
Yeah.
did not deserve to die. And now his death's in vain. And what does that do? Reagan? It emboldens the police to do similar acts.
Yeah.
And I'm a fan of the police. Don't get me wrong. I think we need a police force. I think those guys do a heck of a good job.
We can't live without them. We know that.
But when some people step over the line, don't you think there needs to be some accountability?
Well, and there is possibly another chapter coming in this that probably not too many people have heard about, and this happened in Cleveland, Ohio. The Cleveland Police Department was already under review and investigation and for abusive conduct and whatnot. Changes trying to be put in place in Cleveland. A white police officer shot and killed an unarmed 12-year-old black child. There has been no grand jury ruling as yet. It is going to the grand jury, but the child's family, you remember Benjamin Crump, the attorney who represented the family of Trayvon Martin here in Florida,
okay,
has been hired by the family in Cleveland to be their attorney. So another chapter is going to be written in this when the grand jury in Cleveland decides what it is going. We don't know what the grand jury there is going to do, but there's going to be a ruling coming in Cleveland next.
Well, Clinton made these comments in an interview with Fusion, and I agree with Reagan. I mean, this is starting to be a pattern. He urged people to move beyond hardwired racial perceptions. Said there are preconceptions wired into us. We've got to get beyond them. And there's a divide that exists between the community and the police. I agree with both of those statements. I think that if you're black in America, I think there's still a difference in treatment. And, I think that this has to be evaluated and reevaluated. And I think that the police need to be held accountable just like anybody else needs to be held accountable, because there's certain ways you deal with lawbreakers. Yes, were these people breaking the law? Sure, they were breaking the law. Did they deserve to die? No, they didn't deserve to die. Unless they are, confronting somebody with a weapon and you have to shoot. I don't know, Reagan. I just think that things seem to have changed.
And certainly we're receiving much more exposure on these issues than we have for quite some time now. And to have multiple issues come together in a very short time frame, I think, has brought into sharper focus this particular problem. And it's one that has to be addressed at each individual level, like they're trying to do in Cleveland. So,
exactly.
Well, once again, it is time for us to take a pause along the network line. We'll remind you that this is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks, and in the Orlando area on Tough TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And you know what, Al? We got a couple of minutes left. I think we can come up with a couple of more things that we want to talk about and get off our chest here. Our conversation continues following these messages. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks, and in the Orlando area, seen 3 times a week on Tough TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
And I'm enjoying this conversation today, Al. We don't get to do this too often, so it's always a pleasure to share some thoughts with you and hope that our listeners will take the time to let us know. Well, we know there are some of them out there that love letting us know what they think about what we have to say. So a couple
of final thoughts. The marijuana saga continues in the state of Florida. Feds now say that tribes can sell marijuana. What does that mean for Florida? Well, will marijuana be as legal as poker chips on Native American tribal lands? That's the question being asked after the U.S. Justice Department published a memo directing federal prosecutors nationwide to allow tribes to cultivate and grow pot on their sovereign lands without fear of federal harassment. The decision will be made case by case. There's no indication yet that Florida's 2 federally recognized tribes, the Miccosukee and the Seminoles, will participate, but experts say the proposal opens the door for Native Americans across the country to capitalize on the lucrative new industry, much like the way they began selling cigarettes and opening casinos.
Well, I was going to say, look at the casinos. The rest of nobody else in Florida is allowed to have them, but our native Indian tribes have done quite nicely with them.
Absolutely.
And the state has made out in its taxes on that, too. I wanted to make mention the senatorial elections are finally over with. We had to wait for a runoff in Louisiana, and they do their elections on Saturdays. Mary Landrieu, the incumbent Democratic senator, took a drubbing and has been replaced by a Republican congressman who had represented the Baton Rouge area. She was pretty much the last Democratic senator from what you would call a deep South state. There's now pretty much just one Democrat senator left in all of the South, and that is Florida's Bill Nelson, who probably is very glad that he wasn't on the ballot this last time.
Absolutely. We've seen a complete conversion from 40 years ago when the South was solidly Democratic to now it's completely solidly Republican.
Yeah.
And that's pretty interesting.
It has been, they used to say around 1980, it was going from Democrat to Republican was seen as being like a religious conversion, and I guess in part Jimmy Carter gets some credit for that. In 1976, the evangelicals were all with him. He was a born-again Christian, and by 1980, he had done such a lousy job as president that the Democrats deserted him left and right, and Ronald Reagan won that election in a big landslide.
I don't think we'll ever see a Democratic president from the South again. He'll be the last.
He may be the last one. I have a feeling you're right on that.
I think it all started with LBJ and the Civil Rights law,
yes.
And then that was it. That kind of sealed the deal, I think.
They got aggravated with him, and then Mr. Nixon came along with his so-called Southern strategy, and Spiro Agnew, and names like Claude Kirk. There's one from out of the past for you. Huh?
Yep.
And, one of these days we'll take a look at that and get into some detail, and perhaps some of the folks who lived through it and survived and are well qualified to be discussing that kind of shift in that. Well, again, we say thank you for your time this week. We know that you have lots of choices out there, and we hope that you have enjoyed our meanderings here. No, I wouldn't call them droppings. I can't do that. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
We'll see you next week with another edition of the Florida Roundtable.